Yeah, I think you have it in your hand. Aleph.
Aleph?
Well, page 43, right?
Yeah.
So we're doing page 43, the Sikha about Yud Beis Tammuz. Amongst the stories that the Rebbe told regarding his arrest and his liberation, there's stories that he told about what happened while the arrest was still going on. And this is one of the stories. As they took the Rebbe to jail, he took upon himself a hachlata. He made a resolution that he's not going to allow himself to lose himself. He won't allow himself to be intimidated by them at all. Not only that, but he just won't at all give them any substance. Anything that relates to Yirah Shamayim, he will regard them as if they're non-existent entities. They're like ayin v'efes mamish. It's easy to say when we're sitting here in a classroom in New York, nice summer day, but when you're over there being arrested by them, it's a whole different story. Something that only a Rebbe could do. And the Friedrich Rebbe said that the state of mind that I was in didn't change, even after they punished him, who knows how many times. Many times they punished him for not answering their questions. One of the punishments was that they locked him up in a room, and the room was filled with garbage and filth up to a certain height. There was nothing to lean on. There were rats and all sorts of creatures creeping around in this filth on the walls, and they kept him there for 24 hours. But after that, nothing changed. His resolution was as strong as ever, that he's not going to give them any substance, and as far as he's concerned, they're ayin v'efes mamish. We have to understand this. How could you say that ayin v'efes mamish when they torture you like that and you're being tortured? Let's explain. In the jail, in the cell that the Rebbe was, you couldn't tell the difference between day and night because there was no window to the outside. There was one window, a small window, but it wasn't to the outside. It was blocked or was blocked by a wall, so you couldn't tell the difference because the light of day didn't shine there anyway. But how did he know what part of the day it was? Because there was certain seder, certain order in the jail. They do this at 5 o'clock, they do this at 6 o'clock, this is done at night, this is done by day. So by observing the different things that were happening in the jail, he knew what time it was. It was Thursday, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, 11 o'clock in the morning. And the Rebbe writes that the Friedrich Rebbe, when he was in jail, would daven ba'arichos, which means he would spend more hours davening. And the guards of the jail walked in and he commanded them to stand up. They spoke Russian, but the Rebbe would always answer them in Yiddish because they knew they were Jews, they spoke Yiddish. And he told them he's not standing up. Obviously, because standing up shows that you're submissive, you're submitting yourself to them. And one of the rules in the jail was that when they come to tell you something, like let you know information coming from the office, you had to stand up to listen to what they're telling you. And they told him that they came in to tell him something. But you have to show that you're submissive, so the Rebbe didn't want to stand up. One of the guards, who was a Yid, understood what the Rebbe said, and he said, if you're not going to listen, then we'll beat you up. And the Rebbe said, no. And that's exactly what they did. And they left the room. After that, another group came in. In the group was the person, Lulav. Lulav was the Yid, talking about a young kid of 20-something years old. He was one of those that actually arrested the Friedrich Rebbe. And he was the one that his father was the Lubavitcher Chassid living in Riga. And here it says he was a descendant of Chassidim, but I think his father was the Chassid, maybe his grandfather was. He was the one that told the Frierdiker Rebbe, I'd like to carry your talis and tefillin, because my grandfather carried your grandfather's talis and tefillin, meaning the Rebbe Marash. So obviously not only came from the Lubavitcher family, but a Lubavitcher family that was sort of higher up there because his grandfather carried the tefillin and talis of the Rebbe Marash. And the previous Rebbe took it out of his hand, and he said, no, your grandfather carried my grandfather's talis and tefillin where he wanted to go. And you want to carry my talis and tefillin where you want to go, that I'm not allowing you to do. I'm going to carry it myself. So this is one of the people that came in with the second group. And he said to the Rebbe, why are you making issues? Page 44. Why are you making issues with them? They're coming to tell you something good news. And when they tell you to stand up, just stand up. And the Rebbe didn't answer to him. So Lulav said to the Rebbe, if you don't, they're going to hit you. They'll beat you up. The Rebbe again didn't answer him. And then again, they physically beat the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe writes in the parentheses that he was hurt in such a way that for a very long time later, he still suffered the pain from that. Then a third group came in. It was another Yid, his name was Kavalov. Told the Rebbe to stand up, and again the Rebbe didn't stand up, and he hit him a third time. And he went into a rage, and he said in Russian, we'll teach you a lesson. And then the Rebbe answered him, it depends who will teach whom. And then guards came into the room, and they said to the Rebbe that he's being requested to go to the office. So he went to the office. When he came to the office, so basically they gave in. He came to the office, they let him know that he's going to be freed from jail and go to 3 years in the city of exile. And that's the source of the story. When he was sitting there, when he was standing near the table, he saw his file on the table, and he saw that on the top line it said execution, and next to it said no, and was crossed out. The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't say it because he didn't want to pronounce those words during his lifetime. And then it said 10 years hard labor camp, and crossed out, and next to it said no. And then it said 3 years Kastrama, city of exile, and they wrote yes. Then he asked the Rebbe, how do you want to travel? So he said he wants to go with a certain, I guess I would call this first class. So he said to the Rebbe, you have the money to pay for that? So his answer was, if the money that I had when I came here wasn't taken away, it's still in my possession, I have enough money, and if not, they'll give more money from the house. So they agreed. They said you have 6 hours to go home, and after that, you have to leave and go to the city of Kastrama. And he's not going to go with guards, he'll go on his own. Being that it was Thursday, so the Rebbe said to them, and when am I going to arrive there? So they said, you'll arrive there on Saturday. So the Rebbe answered, Shabbos, I will not travel. And then he concluded, Baruch Hashem, I stayed in jail over Shabbos. Baruch Hashem. So it was a big, big fight. It wasn't so simple. I think we spoke about this already. And that's what happened. Before the Rebbe came to that city, one of his Chassidim, his name was Rebbe Dvorkin, went ahead of the Rebbe, gathered together a group of kids, and he made a cheder. And he also fixed the mikveh. And the Rebbe says, you have to understand what this means. He was arrested for this very reason, for teaching children Torah. He was arrested for the very reason that he was opening up mikvahs, and they were closing them down. And here, the Rebbe is going to the city where he's being punished, and before he gets there, he's already sending a shliach to set things up and do exactly which is the reason for which he was arrested. Every story that the Rebbe tells us, I'm on page 45 where it says Beis, is to teach us something. Teach us a Hiran Avodah. So we know with the Rebbe, I just finished saying that this is a test that hardly anybody could stand by such a test. Only a Rebbe could stand by such a test. But when a Rebbe stands by the test, he opens a new door. He's like someone who paves the road, and now it becomes easier for everybody else to follow. In what way? That if a Yid makes a resolution with the absolute determination that anything that's going to be blocking him and getting in the way of Yiddishkeit, he will not give it any substance. Consider this ayin ve'eves mamish. So with that strength, of that resolution, even if they hit him once and a second time and a third time, and even according to Torah, when something happens 3 times, it's strong. It's very, that gives it strength. But nevertheless, it does not in any way eliminate and not even cause any compromise in that resolution. And not only that he affected the person who was opposing him, which was this Jew Lulav. And how did he start his talk to the Frierdiker Rebbe? He said, Rebbe, because actually he came from Chassidish home. Rebbe, why are you doing it? In other words, even though on the surface it means nothing, but from the Rebbe's perspective, it does mean something. It means that part in him, that deep, deep part in him, that spark, that he recognized that this is the Rebbe, sort of, it came out, which reminds me of another story. There's a Sikha of the Frierdiker Rebbe when he was there in America. I think the year was 1945. And you're reading the Sikha, and then then it says that people were pushing, and because they were pushing, the table was moved, and the table was pressing against the Frierdiker Rebbe. And I mentioned the Frierdiker Rebbe's health was very poor those 10 years that he was in America. You can see on the video he's already coming in a wheelchair. And because of that, they wouldn't allow too many people in the room. And of course, when people were in the room, they were very careful. And here, someone noticed that there's pushing and the table's pressing against the Rebbe. So he shouted, stop pushing. You're pressing the Rebbe. Kvetch dem Rebbe. I don't know how the word kvetch would be translated in English, but it doesn't just mean pushing. It has a connotation of pushing and hurting. You're hurting the Rebbe. What? Crushing, more like, yeah. So, but crushing not in a way like, it's as if in an aggressive way, like you're hurting him, in an offensive way, not just like not realizing what I'm doing. But those are the words that he used. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, a Yid doesn't kvetch me. And then he added, even in this jail, he called it the Shpalerke. When the Yid told me that you should know that within 24 hours, you're not going to be among the living, that's what he said to him. The Yid in him didn't make me uncomfortable. So this reminds me of the famous quote, I don't know who said it. It's not from the Rebbes of Chabad, but a certain Rebbe said that only a tzaddik gomer could love a Russia gomer. In other words, a complete tzaddik, he can appreciate a complete Russia. He is able to see through all the curtains and all the facades that deep, deep down in that person, there's a spark of Yiddishkeit. So here it came out by saying the word Rebbe. So the Rebbe is saying that there are people in your life that sometimes are stopping you, blocking you, getting in your way. But if you make a strong resolution, I'm going to do what I need to do for my Yirat Shamayim and serving Hashem, then you'll be able to carry it out. And not only that, you'll bring out the good in that very person that's trying to block you. So in the second column, the Rebbe says, how much more so today, where we find ourselves in a situation where we have all the freedom to spread Torah, to spread Yiddishkeit. There is nothing blocking. Not only that, there are things today that the government and things outside are actually, they help us, they assist us in doing this work. You get paid for doing this work. So surely, once I make a hachlata, that I'm doing what Hashem wants me to do, there'll be nothing that'll stand in the way. So really we need to understand these words. How does the Rebbe say that he said to himself, they're going to be nothing? What do you mean they're nothing? How could you say they're nothing? There's a famous story with a chassid. He was a very big chassid, a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Amstrasheller. And he was one of the greatest minds. He was actually a chavrusa with the Rebbe, with the Mittel Rebbe when they were younger. but he was also a very, very excitable person. So one time he had a farbrengen talking about what Chassidus talks about, how the whole world is Batul Hashem, the world doesn't exist, and Einad Movado. And he got up all excited and started to dance. And of course, everybody's dancing with him in a circle. And his eyes were closed, and he's dancing. And in the room, there was an oven, and the oven was bulging out of the wall a little bit. So as he was dancing, he came around the circle, he went crashing into the oven. When he crashed into the oven, his reaction was, looks like an oven does exist. He was thinking, nothing exists. How could the Frierdiker Rebbe say that they're nothing and I am ve'efes, there's no substance, they don't exist? How could you say that when they hit him 3 times and they beat him and it caused him injury, and injury that lasted for a very long time? It's not a figment of my imagination, it's very real. So to understand this, I want to learn a little part of a mimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's also a mimer that he said in honor of Yud Beis Tammuz. We learned this mimer here in school last year, but just one part of it, and then we'll try to explain as much as possible. You can pass this around, thank you. I'm doing the part starting on page 196, which is Ois Daled of this mimer. This whole mimer talks about the idea of an nisayon, a test. There's a pasuk in Chumash, Parshas Re'eh, where it says Hashem. There's times that Hashem tests you. So it says the inyan of an nisayon is lalos ulaigia aidei aveda davka the b'chinas dasas havaya. Basically, if you look at the words in the pasuk, those words that this begins with, Hashem tests you to know. The simple meaning is Hashem tests us to know whether we're really committed to Him or not. And the Alter Rebbe asks this question, and every Rebbe following said a mimer on this pasuk asks the same question, and they're going to elaborate more on the answer. And the question is, Hashem does not need a test to know. If I'm having doubts whether a friend of mine is loyal, if I'm having doubts whether a friend of mine is honest, whether a friend of mine is really, truly dedicated, I don't know. I can't know what's going on in another person's mind and another person's heart. The only way to know this is when there's a test. Something comes up and it's challenging and I see the way they act. And then I can recognize, wow, this person's really loyal. The person's really dedicated. Or if they fail the test, I realize that it's not so deep, it's not so real, it's more superficial. Look, a little stumbling block and they can go on with it. But being that this is Hashem, and He could read our minds and our hearts to the deepest depth, even more than we can know ourselves, He doesn't need a test to know where I'm at. So why does it say Hashem tests you in order to know? And the way it's explained in the mimer is that it's not in order for Hashem to know. It's in order for us to know that when a person, the reason of a test, the purpose of a test is number one, to raise us to a higher spiritual level. And what is that higher spiritual level? That we have a much deeper, greater knowledge of Hashem. And we have das in Hashem. And in the Maimon, he goes into the details what das is. At this point, we're not going into that exactly, but it'll suffice to say that through a nisayon, we reach a higher level in our connection to Hashem. The sparks of godliness in the last Golus, which means after the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and especially in the last Golus and the last phase of the last Golus, which is called Ikvus Mashiach, the footsteps or the heels of Mashiach, Mainly, the sparks that need to be elevated are the sparks that are hidden in tests. The godly spark is hidden in these tests more than anything else. This indicates how the root is so much higher. One of the points that he explains is that we know this famous principle that's found in a lot of places in Chassidus, that the lower something is, it comes from a higher source. And this is the mashal that's usually given, kamashal or evan, like the mashal of the rock. Shabaresh HaKaisel, you have a wall, and the wall has many stones and many layers of stones. So it's a 10-foot wall, 20-foot wall. Those stones that are on top of the wall, kishnayful, when this wall will fall, then it falls much further away from the original spot. And those stones that are lower in the wall, when the wall falls, it falls closer to the original place. The same thing with the sparks of godliness that come from the world of Tohu, that when the sparks of godliness, when the world of Tohu broke and the sparks fell down, those that fell very far away from Kedusha, and those that fell not so far away, and those that are very close. The closer it is, it's an indication it comes from a lower place in the world of Tohu. And the further it is an indication that it comes from a higher source in the world of Tohu. So for example, when you have food that's kosher, there's a spark of godliness in there that comes from the world of Tohu. And that spark is not treif, so it's not so far from Kedusha. Then you have a spark of godliness and something that's treif. Being that it's not kosher, it means it's further away from holiness. It's an indication that even though it's further, but its source and the roots are a higher place in the world of Tohu. Then there's something even higher, and that is the spark in a test. The difference is food that's not kosher is not kosher, but it doesn't aggressively oppose Yiddishkeit. A test means something that's happening that's aggressively opposing my connection to Hashem, aggressively making an effort to get in the way between me and Hashem, whether the fact that I'm being attracted to certain Aveira, to do something, to say something, to go someplace, to flare up with anger, anything that happens, that's a force. I feel there's something forceful that's pulling me away from Hashem. That's the test, and there's a godly spark in it. And that godly spark, because it's aggressively opposing Hashem, has to come from a higher source. But the way we elevate the spark in a test is different than the way we elevate the spark in food and in other objects. The test is not elevated the same way we elevate other physical things. A house, a place, clothing, food, it's different. For example, physical food. Is a physical drink. That there's a spark in the food, and that spark has to be elevated. How is it elevated? That a person eats the food, he eats the food according to the guidelines of Torah, which is he makes a bracha before, he makes a bracha after. Let's turn the page. And of course, the eating itself is in a refined way, and he eats it properly. And in that case, he's able to elevate mevarer as hamaychel. So what does this mean? That the way the person elevates the food is by engaging with the food, making a bracha on it, eating it, thinking with thoughts when I eat it that I'm eating for the purpose of health, I'm eating for the purpose of serving Hashem better, then making a bracha after, so I'm engaging the food. The food gives me strength, and then with this strength, I daven and I learn and I do mitzvahs and I do good deeds. That's how the spark in the food gets elevated and it ascends to Kedusha. The same with all other gashmizic things. When a person is dealing with money, with business, with clothing, with a house, it's basically I'm dealing with it, I'm engaging it, and I'm engaging it according to the guidelines of Torah, and that's how I elevate the spark in it. So you see, because there's a spark there, and I'm aiming at that spark. I'm trying to get the spark out, extract it, and connect it, reconnect it to its source by dealing with it the right way. That's generally speaking, but a test is different. But a test is different. The way you elevate the godly spark in a nisayon, which is actually comes from a higher source, the way you elevate is not by engaging with the test. The person has to work with himself, and he works with himself. This gaber ala nisayon, to not allow himself to be weakened by this test, which means hanisayon eine davar mitzaratzme klal. A nisayon, it's not something that's real, it has no real substance. This is not to be compared with other physical things. They do have substance, and they have a spark in it. And therefore, in order to elevate the spark, you have to reach that spark, have to access it, get hold of it, and elevate it. But the nisayon, eine davar klal, it really has no true substance. It's something which Hashem set up, lahalim v'lemnaya. Its entire being is to block me and to conceal and to confuse me. It's almost like Hashem created this deception. And that's what gives it strength. What gives it strength is, and its identity, what defines it, that it's blocking me from connecting to Hashem. And therefore, all I need to do primarily is work with myself to overcome it and to remove the concealment. This is by arousing that deep essence of the neshama, which is the yichida in the neshama, to stand strong and be with all the force in the world against anything that's stopping me. So here we have the same thing again, and this is the source, that an nisayon is something that has no true substance. And of course, when you read this, you're thinking, what is he saying? What do you mean no true substance? It's so true. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe, what the guards weren't true. The people that were sent to Russian jails in Siberia weren't true. It was very real. What does it mean it has no true substance? So no true substance doesn't mean that they're a figment of my imagination. What it means is that the concealment, that there's something in that's really, truly blocking me from Hashem, that doesn't have any true substance. That has as much substance as I give it. And if I am strong in my resolution, and I'm not going to allow this person or these circumstances or this situation to weaken my yirat shamayim, my fear of God, or my commitment to Hashem, then it will have absolutely no substance whatsoever. The classical example of this, even though that's very different, but the idea, the principle is the same, is the story of Avraham Avinu. He was the first person that was tested 10 times. He was on the way to the Akedah. He was being tested to bring his son to the Akedah. So besides the test, to go bring his son to the Akedah, there were more tests on the way. And it says that as he was going to Hara Maria, there was a river that appeared suddenly. There wasn't supposed to be a river there, and there was a river. And Avraham Avinu walks into the river. He didn't stop till the water came to his nostrils. If he goes any further, he can't breathe anymore. He kept walking, and then miraculously, the river disappeared. Why? Because there was no river. The river was really the Satan that appeared in the form of a river, which means it wasn't a true substance. And by him not giving it any substance, it became non-existent because it was non-existent in the first place. Not that in that case, it actually means physically, there was no physical real water there. It was just the Satan appearing as water. But in our case, generally speaking, the Frierdiker Rebbe's case, it's not saying that these people were a figment of imagination. They were real people, real punishments, real torture, But the fact that it stands in the way, and this could really truly stop me from doing what I'm supposed to do as a Yid, from lowering my standards in any way, that part is not emes. That's a figment of my imagination. And the more I give it substance, the more substance it has. And the less I give it substance, it becomes smaller and smaller until it becomes non-existent. I mean, of course, every situation is different and every person has different kinds of tests. But this is the principle behind it. But I remember hearing once from someone who had a different kind of test completely. Talking about someone who was a chassid, but he was a chassid not from Chabad. He began to study Chassidus Chabad, became very passionate about it, and he became secretly a Chabad chassid. Secretly, because if his family would find out, they would have a cow. So after a while, they found out, and they were harassing him. They wouldn't let him live. Any opportunity they had, they tortured him, and came to a point where I think he had to move away from the neighborhood, but still, it's his family, and he wanted to visit with them. So he wrote to the Rebbe, "What do I do every time I go visit with them? We run into this, just get into arguments, and things explode." So the Rebbe said to him, "When you come there, when they start talking about this subject, just change the subject." He says, "You can't imagine how it worked miraculously." They started telling, "What does Lubavitch do this and this?" And he would say, in this parsha, it's something amazing. He tells them a question on the parsha, and they go on to the answer, and they get over the subject, and it gets quiet. What does that mean? Distraction. In other words, I can answer them, and they answer me, and then it becomes explosive, and it has the results that it has. By me not giving it substance, it loses its substance. Again, not that these people aren't real, and not that they're not very, very angry at me, but the fact that I don't give substance to this opposition allows it to sort of just phase out. And in every situation, we need advice how to do that. What does it mean? But one thing is clear, that an assign is something where the main work is not with the other person, it's with me, working with myself, not to be intimidated, not to be weakened by things that are going on. I saw a similar letter from the Rebbe where someone writes to the Rebbe that he's in the city, has a Chabad community and Chabad activities, and there are people there who oppose Chabad, and they're giving him a very hard time, and they're not letting him do this and not letting him do that. And the Rebbe writes that the reason is because you're giving them too much substance. If you just do what you have to, don't pay attention, don't go into arguments, just do what you have to do, then you will see that the opposition will just melt. The Rebbe, for the first time, introduced this idea of printing packet tanyas. It looks like it's normal, but it's a very new thing. Never such thing as a tanya this size. And the Rebbe said to print it. The simple reason is so you can study tanya when you're traveling, small little tanya. But the Rebbe added something else. And the Rebbe said, you're on the train, and someone sits down next to you, and he starts a whole conversation about what do you have to learn Chassidus for? It's a waste of time, or you're not allowed to. It's not meant for you people. It's only meant for big tzaddikim. All sorts of arguments. And the Rebbe says, instead of arguing with him and having dialogues and debates, take out a Tanya and say, come, let's learn something. And once you do that, you'll see that everything will melt. That's why he made a pocket Tanya. So at every opportunity, you can just take it out and learn. Basically, again, every situation needs to know how to apply the principle there. But the principle is, and the Friedrich Rebbe situation was, of course, something that only a Rebbe can handle. But the general idea is don't give the opposition substance. We spoke about this many times in class about internal nisayon, thoughts that disturb me, depressing thoughts, angry thoughts, resentful thoughts about different people. There's one way to talk to myself and have a dialogue in my head, what I should think, what I shouldn't think. I really shouldn't be upset for this reason, that reason. And the other approach is just don't pay attention. Don't give it substance. And if you don't give it substance, you'll see slowly and but surely it will just melt. Because that's what an Nisayon is. I think I mentioned this a little bit of a different expression used, but there's the same. That when Avraham Avinu brought Yitzchak to the Akedah, the Farshim asked the question, right? Before I asked the question, what was he thinking? We know the end of the story. The end of the story was they lived happily ever after. That Yitzchak was never brought as a carbon, it was only a test. But what was Avraham Avinu thinking? I told you many times that I don't like suspense. So when I have to read a book, I'll read the last page first, make sure the guy is alive, and now I can read the rest of the story. Yeah. So the end of the story is that Yitzchak is alive, and he wasn't really brought as a carbon. We know that. Well, what was Avraham Avinu thinking? Hashem promised him, and he said, Yitzchak will be a father of a great nation. It'll be such a big nation that they won't be able to be counted like the stars in heaven or like the sand on earth. And then before Yitzchak is even married, doesn't even have one child, Hashem says to him, now bring him as a carbon. How did he reconcile these two things in his head? There are different answers that people say. He was thinking this and he was thinking that. But in the Zohar, it says, and the way Chassidus explains it is, he was thinking that he just didn't pay attention to it. So this is basically seichel, logic is challenging what Hashem told me. He didn't give it any substance. He just went ahead. Hashem told me, whatever Hashem said is emes. He said Yitzchak will be a carbon, emes. He said Yitzchak will have children, emes. How does it go together? None of my business. I don't have to figure it out. And he didn't give it any substance, and it didn't get in the way. He did it with all the excitement and did it as if there was no question whatsoever. So that's the way you deal with the Nisayon. And that's the way we deal with our Nisayon. So, of course, the big Nisayon of our time today is this Amunah in Mashiach, that here we have something happens which is spectacular. Wow, we see Mashiach is coming. Then something happens which, God forbid, the exact opposite. And then where do you see Mashiach? And all sorts of questions and all sorts of things that get in the way. And sometimes the questions come from people who have authority and they studied and they know, and yet they're challenging. And yes, it's good to find an answer to question for other people to, if they're interested to know the answer. But for myself, I don't give it any substance. And if I don't give it any substance, it won't have any substance. And that's where we have to deal with all the tests, especially summer. It says that summer is a time that we're tested in Yiddishkeit more than during the winter. Because summer is a time where it's warm, nice weather. The Gashmia sort of is more pronounced and people want to have a good time. And very often it causes people to be a little bit more relaxed when it comes to Yiddishkeit and Yerushalayim during the summer. But if a person makes a strong resolution, then there's no difference. Summer, winter, fall, rain, shine, snow, hail, I'm the same person, nothing changes. That's the way it's going to be. And when something looks to be difficult, it's only as difficult as I make it. I remember someone was telling me, and it's true, probably everyone had this experience, that she wanted to do the chitas, and she was very tired. And then she said to herself, no, I'm not going to make it. I'll do it tomorrow. Okay, it's okay. Nothing wrong, not the end of the world. But she was just tired. She felt that it's impossible. A minute later, her phone rings. And one of her friends calls her. And she gets on the phone. And they have a conversation for the next 20, 25 minutes. And when she hangs up, she says to herself, wow, that's interesting. I was so exhausted. I thought it's impossible for me to be up another 5 minutes. And now I'm up for 25 minutes. What happened? Obviously, this was something that captured my interest more than that. So we see that has a lot to do with me and my perspective and my state of mind rather than the physical circumstances. Now, of course, it's more interesting that than to do the chitas sometimes. But I'm not bringing out that point. I'm bringing out a different point. that we see that things that appear to be, it's a physical sort of problem. No, it's not physical. It's not technical. It has a lot to do with perspective. Okay, so this is the last class of this school year. So we have to finish off with a good line. And the good line is the positive end of the line, that if we stand strong and you make a resolution to go forward and to grow, there's nothing in the world that could stop you, and nothing really has any substance, and you would succeed. So Mirza Hashem, of course, we're scheduled to meet tonight at the graduation. We hope that the only thing that will change the plans is the Mashiach comes before, and we'll have to postpone the graduation for another day, and we'll be rejoicing with Mashiach, at least for Shabbat Brachas for 7 days.